What if every single person in the presidential line of succession died all at once? Not one or two, not a plane crash or an assassination attempt, everyone. No president, no vice president, no speaker, no cabinet. That sounds absurd because it is absurd. But it's not quite impossible in the strictest legal sense, and the United States Constitution doesn't magically fill in blanks for what happens next. So today, we're going to answer a question I don't think anybody really asked until now. What happens if every person in the line of succession dies, but Congress still exists as is? And the answer is simultaneously simple, counterintuitive, and deeply revealing about how American constitutional law actually works. We're going to walk through what the line of succession is, why it ends, what the Constitution says and what it doesn't, and how Congress would actually restore the presidency, step by surprisingly boring step. Let's begin. Before we even start to dive into what happens if this list is empty, we need to understand what it actually is. The U.S. Constitution creates the presidency and the vice presidency, and it authorizes Congress to set the order of succession after that. But the actual list of offices after vice president is not in the Constitution. It only exists because of a statute called the Presidential Succession Act. This list outlines a series of offices, 18 in total, that can become the president if the person in front of them cannot serve. In the context of the current administration, Trump's second administration, this includes the Vice President, J.D. Vance, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, President Pro Temp of the Senate, Chuck Grassley, Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, Attorney General, Pam Bondi, Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Labor, Lori Chavez DeRemer, Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Scott Turner, Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Doug Collins, and Secretary of Homeland Security in Spot 18, I can only assume because it's the most recently created cabinet-level secretary, Kristi Noem. If every one of these people is gone, the statutory line is exhausted. There is no one left, and the statute does not go further than that. That's not hypothetical. That's literally what the law says. In this situation, we're assuming Congress still exists, that there are still members of the House and Senate able to meet and vote. That matters because the next step from here is entirely congressional. So, that entire ordered list is gone. First, does the government collapse? No. The federal government does not dissolve if the presidency is vacant. Cabinet agencies still operate under existing law. The judiciary still functions. Military commands continue under standing orders. What doesn't exist is someone with the constitutional authority to sign bills, issue executive orders, nominate judges, or head diplomatic relations. So the government enters kind of a legal limbo, an executive vacuum of sorts, but not a systemic collapse. That vacuum creates pressure to act. And who can act? Congress. Congress has the legal power to rebuild the executive. This is where the 25th Amendment becomes the most important tool in the Constitution. Most people think of the 25th Amendment as the part that allows the president to be removed or replaced due to incapacity. But its least appreciated function, and the one that matters most in this situation, is its provision for filling a vacancy in the vice presidency. Under Section 2 of the 25th Amendment, whenever there is a vacancy in the office of the vice president, the president shall nominate a vice president who takes office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. That's crucial. In a world with no president No vice president, Congress can confirm a new vice president, even if the president isn't nominating them. So here's how it would play out in 5 steps. Step 1. The House and Senate reconvene and acknowledge the vacancy. Number 2. Congress passes emergency legislation clarifying authority and process. Number 3. Members debate and vote on a nominee for vice president. Number 4. Once confirmed by a majority in both chambers, that nominee becomes the new vice president. Number 5. Under the Constitution, a vice president who is confirmed properly then becomes the president immediately. From zero leadership to a new president. No court cases needed, no generals seizing power, just a constitutional fix Congress already has the authority to make. Let's pause and acknowledge something really important. This process would be incredibly boring. This would not be dramatic, it wouldn't be violent, and it wouldn't really be chaotic. It would be awkward, procedural, and extremely deliberate. Why, you may ask? Because every major institution has vested interest in restoring normal governance, not exploiting this vacuum. Foreign governments would watch. Markets would react. The military would continue its defensive operations. But no one would want to create an extra-legal authority because it invites instability. So Congress would operate quickly, not because it wants power, but because a functioning government matters more than any individual politician or party. And the person Congress installs would almost certainly not be a radical or power grabber. They would likely choose someone experienced, someone familiar with constitutional procedure, or someone capable of restoring order. This is not a moment for political feuds. This is a moment for institutional stability. Once a new president exists, their first priority will not be legislation on taxes, healthcare, or foreign policy. Their first priority is continuity. They must nominate a new vice president, confirm cabinet leaders, and rebuild the line of succession from scratch. Only after that continuity is restored can the government really return to business as usual. This sequence is not accidental, it's by design. The Constitution treats the executive branch as something that must be reconstituted, not simply replaced. So, what does all of this mean? If every person in the presidential line of succession died, the presidency becomes vacant. The government continues to function, but the executive branch can't do anything. Congress would confirm a new vice president, that vice president would then become president, and slowly, the executive branch would be rebuilt. This is not a speculative fantasy. This is what the law actually provides. No, the system isn't perfect, but it is pretty resilient. The Constitution isn't magic, it's procedure. And procedure, if followed, can restore authority, even in situations when that truly feels impossible. So, if every person in the presidential line of succession died, the United States wouldn't descend into chaos. It would restore its executive leadership through a very constitutional mechanism designed for continuity. Power is not in personalities, it's in law and procedure. And once you really understand that, even the dumbest question can teach you something important about how this republic actually works.